as on earth it is in heaven, like we echo throughout who we are and what comes up into our life and what we deal with and how we present ourselves, and everything means something. And we're all connected as well. So being in spirit form, you're allowed to be free and have free will, and being in human form, it's the same. We're allowed to be free and have free will, or continue our battles. But the work that we have to do while we're here is so important, because what we create with our spirits and our bodies is what's going to create that continuous uh, our future.
Welcome, Alicia. I am so honored to have you as my guest. As I mentioned, you've had three near-death experiences, and that's pretty amazing. One when you were just 5, one in 2002, and then another in 2013. My viewers like to hear about near-death experiences. Would you like to start out by sharing some of those with us?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much. I feel privileged to be able to share or debrief, so to speak, so you guys can all just hear my story. My first near-death experience, I was about 5 years old, or about that age, and I went into the hospital to have my tonsils and adenoids removed. And I was always a very, very sick kid, always just real sick, because I struggled with those. And so I went in for surgery. My younger brother, who's about a little, a year and a half younger than me, went in on the same day to have tubes put in his ears. And so we both got prepped together, and we went back for our procedures together, and we woke up together about the same time, I guess. So this was back in 1985. And when I woke up from my procedure, I remembered this very vivid dream. And I tried as best I could to tell my dad about this dream. And he, when you're recovering, you're supposed to be still, and you're especially not supposed to talk so much. But I was very adamant to share what I saw. And then in the recovery room, I asked my brother if he had a dream too. And did he feel as horrible? Like, I could not move at all. I was just really weak. And he demonstrated to me, by getting up out of bed and jumping in the air, to which the nurse, ushered him back in his bed and to sit still. And he's showing, I feel great. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't have any dreams. And I don't feel great. But I forgot the dream, of course, but remembering something was different, I guess. The after effects really is what points my fingers to that experience, because I grew up after that, just kind of, when I was directly after that, mesmerized with mirrors and looking at my reflection everywhere I went, and watching moments in our life just pause, and I could reflect on moments like it were a picture, and uh, just take a lot of detail in, and also lots of memories of gazing up at the sky at night, looking at the stars, and asking God, when can I come back home? And I just wanted to go back home. Um, and it was just something I kept to myself. But I was also very sensitive to others' needs, and very in tune to animals, and very, I guess, just in my own little bubble. So anyway, I grow up with a pretty stressful life, as is as a child. It was very survival mode. My dad was a drug addict, and he was divorced, so it was my brothers, and we we're exposed probably to most things that children shouldn't really be exposed to, but we never had a chance to be removed from the situation. So I feel like my life experience is also very stressful and or distressing, as my DNDE shows in parts of it. Um, with, it had positive aspects too, as even a stressing life does have its positive aspects, even if we choose to look for them in very simple forms. Um, so I grew up and continued a very stressful life until I ran away from where I was living at the age of 19, and I became, homeless and functional homeless because I had my career and I had work, but my home life was very unstable and very stressful. And uh, I, not pointing fingers or blame to anybody because those and still are my choices to be where I'm at. Um, what I associate good and bad to me, like we're all good, we're all bad. Everyone's equal, but there's a lot of segregation in the world. So I kind of chose to just free fall, just focusing on the bare necessities and definitely not focusing on money, which helps everybody live a more successful life. So I'll bring you now to 2002 when I was just turned 22 years old, 2 weeks after my 22nd birthday. I was visiting an ex-boyfriend and we had separated. I hadn't seen him for about a month. And it was a very stressing relationship as well, not very positive. And um, he guided me over, I believe, to murder me. And he had planned an attack, and I was stabbed in the back with a dagger, which is a very long blade. I was wrapped in a blanket, and after, he washed me in the tub, and I basically bled to death, wrapped me up in a blanket, and I was ready to be disposed of. But he called his brother to help him, and his brother decided to help me instead. And so I was rescued by the police. I was still alive, barely. And my experience, I believe, began in the ambulance going to the hospital. The blade pierced my kidney, my stomach, and my intestine. So it went almost all the way through, but not out. And so I've lost a lot of blood. When I was in the ambulance, I was laying down and the two medics had already got me in, the door was shut and we were moving. And I, at that point, could hear them talking. Once everything had settled down, they decided to continue their conversation of whatever they were discussing before they had gotten my call. And so once the conversation turned away from me, I kind of felt put off because like I felt like I needed the attention. And so in that moment of just thinking, okay, well, it's not about me and I feel like I'm in trouble right now. The second the blade went in me and came out, I saw at the corner of my left sphere, the blade was dripping in blood. And I immediately called out to basically say a prayer, dear God, help me. I've been stabbed. And then I kind of went out after that, even before I hit the floor. Um, and I knew that God was going to help me. So when the medics changed their focus, I as well changed mine. And in that focus change, I felt myself go down. And once I was in a dark area, um, I stayed there for a long time and I could feel movements and I could hear things occasionally. I could feel slowly, I guess perceptions were changing. Like I knew I was in a room. I knew I was in the ambulance. I knew I was laying on a bed, but The darkness was always there. I felt visitors, I should say, coming in, and I felt their presence, but I couldn't hear anything. And I felt a reoccurring presence of I don't know, just a presence, and it was dark, so you couldn't see anything. And they would come and come, and one of them would continue. And the longer I was in this darkness, even more detail would come. So the more time, the more detail. And so I could even start to see like shadow, and which detailed more through time. And I was being visited by like a man, and he had another person, another man with him that would come and go and sit by my bed. And I couldn't move, but the detail of the room became clearer, and the presence of them continually being there became normal. And so I could see them moving around. And at one point, I had become aware of spears all in the room, hundreds of them pointed at me, and they were very sharp, like not metal, but like iron or cement. I don't know what type of material, all one piece from the entire room. And I had one of them coming right at me in the middle of my eyes, and I could not move. It was so close and so sharp. And I felt like these two presences were really messing with me. I wasn't physically in pain, but that was very fearful to see that and feel that. Of course, it would change. So that experience came and then it went. And then at one point, this guy who was in the room, he had no shirt on. He had long, strangly hair, light colored, and a very kind of dark demeanor, I guess, not speaking, but he had come at the right side of my bed and sat down. And he was smoking a cigarette, which in hospitals isn't allowed. But again, there were no lights and there were no nurses, just time and darkness. And he slowly put his hand down towards me. And his hand wasn't a normal hand, though. It was like it had metal claws for each digit, and in between that sat a lit cigarette. And so that was pretty scary, coming out of a dark, image next to my bed in a hospital. Yet I decided to take the cigarette and smoke it. And I remember thinking, where am I going to ash this? Laying in bed. But it was still a very vivid part of my experience. And after I took the cigarette from his metal clawed like hands, and that was over, it changed to where I was now off the bed, still in a room that was dark, but I had movement. And the man who had offered me the cigarette was still there, and the other presence of the person was gone, and it was just him and me. And his appearance changed. He no longer had long hair. It was bald, in fact, no hair. And he had a left arm that looked like three swords coming out instead of an arm, that were also blades, like a sharp metal. And they were movable, like they were part of his body. And then he had his normal arm with a hand of claws, his mouth open, and he had very sharp clawed teeth. And he, on the top of his head, had an erectness. So I've heard people wonder if that sounds like Pazazu. And I've done a little research on it, but it is a very scary image, and I have no idea where it came from, but it is similar to that. And it was very intimidating, very fearful for me, but he came at me And I just decided at that point that I was going to, with my movement, defend myself as best I could, even though obviously up against something like that, there's nothing I can do. I remember the fight. It was very hands-on. I remember feeling his skin, um, and how cool to the touch, and it was, soft even, like, you can press it, but it just was your press was ineffective. But we did roll and scrap, and, I just tried to do what I could in a moment of sheer chaos. I found myself wrapped around by him where my back was to his chest, and I even grabbed his swords, not caring if I were to hurt myself to try to push out. And he had wrapped around me and he had sunk his teeth into the back of my head. And I just pushed my heels into the ground and pushed him back further to try to get and break away. And at that point, there was a release, and he had become completely enraged and crying and screaming and scrambling around while I was just left there. And he had his eyes were gone, and so he had become blind. Nothing that I felt that I did, it was just part of the story, where it had changed again. And um I did nothing. There was nothing I could do except lay there, and the experience changed. It was still darkness, and time just passed. And when I looked up again from my past time, I had movement, and so I got up and looked around the dark room and saw, like, like a loft, I guess I was in, where you could walk over to the wall that was only half a wall. And I looked down through it, and everything was made of like cement, really. It was all one piece, all one structure. Nothing was put together. It was just fluid, but the structure of it was just immensely huge, like bigger even than a castle. The only way I could describe the size of it, if ever seen that movie with the dwarfs in it, and they live under the mountain, and it's just this big, huge, vast castle, but it was as big as that, but all just cement, all in one piece, and a huge open space with a corridor of cement going down all the way through to the other end of the wall. And I looked down and I saw the demon that I had fought on a metal table on the corridor being pushed all the way through to the end of the structure by a man who was bald, had a leather apron on, clothes, pushing this metal cart with the demon laying on it. He was literally cut in half. And so it was only his upper torso, his weapons of his arm and his hand, his mouth, and everything else was removed off of him, and he was wrapped in a clear orange bag, and it was come all around him and came up to the top of his head, and the top of the wrap was just up at the top of his head where that image of him had changed, and it was very shimmery looking, like it was very uh noticeable in the color and in the fact that it was just wrapped in that way. I noticed it. And I was just my emotions at that point, someone would say, "Wow, how shocking." But I really wasn't that amazed. I just took everything all in, being as exhausted and done as I was. There was nothing I can do. So I just took it all in and felt to go lay back down on rest in the middle of the room and just wait again with time. And I remember moving my head and looking in this direction and feeling just the density of everything. Was even movement was just so exhausting and hard. By the way, very similar to our day-to-day lives sometimes. But anyway, on to my story. I felt a very intense, whooshing, roaring, just like woo, 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 woo type. Even it felt, it sounded, but if, again, I was just all in darkness and only aware of feeling. And it felt, if I could describe it here, like a helicopter and being lifted up, because I did feel lifted up and going, movement. But again, just no movement for me. I was already done. And so I moved on from being downstairs, as I feel like I was, uh, however you would like to term that, but that experience, um, is just a story that reflects even the struggles of any fight. Um, our battles in life could be related to that as well, or even just gladiator battles in general, that we just see who's going to come out. And so, um, after being whooshed up and out of there, I felt like I was still laying, unable to move, but in a different area. I felt not people around me, but I felt presence around me, that wasn't dark. Um, just not knowing where I was or who they were, but I felt cared for and safe enough to just be able to lay there and rest and take up my time in that. And I did feel transported, like moved. And so at one point I was laying on dirt floor in like a house. I remember now hearing language or sounds of people talking, but not any words that I could understand. And I felt the distribution or passing of weapons, um, in cases or boxes. So definitely weird things to feel, but stayed with me. And then the transition moved again, and I was no longer laying down or being still or unaware, but I had moved now into a shell type, like an egg shell, because it was ovalistic, I guess, like an egg, but I was inside it. I actually found myself in space because there was a little window up in the egg that I could peek up and look out and see space. There was a seat in the shell that I could take a seat. It was very small. I could stand up, and it was enough for me to be in this little shell and take a step, look out the window, and sit back down. And I was literally waiting in there for what felt like forever, which is a really long time to describe, so I won't try. But when I wondered if I would be in there for forever is the moment that I found myself not there anymore. I was in a ocean scene, and it was a raging storm in the ocean with gigantic, massive waves. It was dark, but there was a storm, so you saw light from the lightning, and you could see the clouds and the water. And I was suspended in the middle of the air, unable to move, and filled with complete fear, not knowing where I was, why I couldn't move. It was so scary to see the waves and the storm, and I couldn't move. I was suspended. And I look down into the water and I see this figure swimming. and he was made of water. It was a man, he had a beard and a long curly hair, and um, made of the waves and water, and he was in the middle of doing a butterfly. And well, I don't know if that's the middle or the beginning, probably the beginning, coming up and coming down. The experience lasted like a millisecond, um, because he hardly had time to move to finish his stroke, but he had his eyes to look up at me, and him and I looked at each other. And again, I was just filled with fear where I am and who he is, and the intense power around me to my being was so overwhelming. And so in that millisecond that happened, it was over, and I moved on to another experience where I found myself moving as the wind, or moving as spirit, because I was free and I had movement, and I was unafraid, and I was free, like no worries, traveling through a desert. And out in the distance was a set of mountains, and the sun was going down, and it was sunset, and the colors bounced off the mountains. Like, to describe them here would be surreal, but when I was there, it wasn't a second thought. And I saw from the base of the mountain a road, and I looked because it got my interest, and there was a motorcycle on the road, and a dog was on the motorcycle. So I immediately went to that area and just got immediately just right. I could see every detail of the dog, his ear, his tail, his tongue, and the wind flapping, and feel his joy and his just confidence, and just it was just peace and just the most awesome experience. And I was just awed, like, wow, that's so cool. And what a wonderful image. And I really loved it. And that also only lasted just a few moments, and I was done with that area and on to another. Um, Waking up in the hospital, I was in a coma for 9 days, um, on life support. I pulled my own breathing tube out, and I was a very ungrateful patient. I definitely did not want to be back. Um, I also felt attacked, and I was guarded and overwhelmed, but I was still ready to fight if I had to. When I reached up to the back of my head, I did have blood there, but no wound. I had been wearing a necklace, and it also had been sitting with all the blood around it, and I could pull the flakes off of it, of old blood and necklace, like the back of my head. And I had a number 7 carved into my palm, and it was like a number 7 with a line through it. And it was very shocking to me because it was very pronounced line that was not deep. It was just the superficial layer of the skin. Um, and in the first 3 days that I woke up, my skin on my palms, on both palms, began to shed very oddly, just dry skin all over. And I could rub my hands together, and just flakes of dry skin would come off. And that happened for 3 days. And on the third day, the 7 had been faded and was gone on the third day, and the shedding of my skin stopped. And it was just a very odd experience. I asked my brother, what does this mean? And he's a Christian, and he said that, well, 7 is usually a sign from God. So it was baffling to me, not sure if I was bringing my battle wounds home, not sure if what I saw was real. And after the first night of being awake, they moved me to the 4th floor in the hospital. where the first night I was left unattended to by any nurses, not checked on. I had a roommate in the room, and she had her gallbladder taken out and so she was in recovery from an emergency gallbladder removal, and her girlfriend actually snuck in and stayed with her all night, and they slept together in the bed. And I had another experience in the hospital where I had got up on my own because I had to get up to go to the bathroom, and I wasn't able to maneuver very well, and the large hospital door actually ended up shutting into my wound. The door handle shut into my wound, and I was in so much pain, but I was able to get going. And like I said, no nurses. I don't even think I knew about a call button, you know. I just was waiting the time out. At one point, I had gotten up and looked out the window and saw a scene of war and water everywhere. There were ships on the water, and this was back in Las Vegas, Nevada. Tall buildings with water was not the scene that I would normally be looking out of my window. There were weapons. I don't know what lights like flying through the sky that were like weapons, like bombs, and then people running through the ground. I could see them. And I just walked to the hospital door of my room and opened it and looked out, wondering if we were in evacuation, if someone was going to be coming to get me finally. And the lights were all out and there was no one around. And my roommates were still sleeping, and I'm not going to wake them up. So I just went back to my bed and I waited. I had got up at another point and, you know, was being drawn to the window. And then at this point, I was being drawn to the closet, and it felt hot, like flames, like maybe the building was on fire. I was so afraid. I didn't open the door, but I could feel the heat. I just went back and waited in bed. Um, I had an odd experience being in the bed because I had left the room and I was in as spirit, so no form, but I was out in the war as spirit. And way up high at a building, I saw a family, a mother and father with a young child, maybe 3 or 4, praying to me to take their baby and save it, which I couldn't do because I was just spirit, but I could just witness to what they were seeing. And I saw this baby fall all the way um, to the ground. So it was really hard, uh, not being able to reach out or be able to help, but just witness something so hard in a setting like that. Um, so those images really stayed with me for a long time as to why I was there and why I saw that, um, and see the suffering. But I nothing else happened from that night of the war scene. I had been back in my bed. The morning had come. The next day, there was a doctor, the head doctor, like a counselor, to come speak to you. And I was just tripping out. And I tried as best I could in my weak lungs to describe to him my story and my fight and everything that I just shared with you as best I could. And he just very simply listened and then stated that I should move on with my life, never think about it again, and I'll be okay, which I was completely shocked to hear that, and shot down because I was very confused. 2 months after I got out of the hospital, so this would be 5 months after I was, about 4 months, I'm sorry, I was in the hospital for 2 months. And 2 months after that, I was in a bed recovering. I was really very slow to recover. I had massive infection, a tube in my back to drain the infection. Um, and so I saw on the news, just in passing, just by chance, that the hospital had been busted, so to speak, for distributing drugs illegally. And in my experience of being near death, I felt that. And so when I saw that on the TV, it really validated for me at that moment that I did have this experience. And um, there's no way I could have known that, but it was a way to validate for me. Um, so yeah, that was my distressing one. It was bad in the fight, but it was also good. I could explain, being in a battle, being exposed to that extreme fear, and being exposed to pure love, peace, and tranquility that I found in the image that I had with the dog, which was a Springer Spaniel, by the way, on a motorcycle. Maybe it was Harley Davidson, maybe not, I don't know. Uh, but I could pick and choose, do I want to live my life like the Springer on the bike? Or do I want to live my life like I'm constantly in the battlefield? Do I want to live my life like I'm frozen with fear? And to answer those, it's not like um a lot of people would say, oh well, let's ride with the dog forever. But sometimes we got to go through those battles um and create change through our transitions. When I was pregnant with my second son, I was homeless and working, of course, a functional homeless, but I found myself staying with people who didn't really have the highest standards. I don't want to call them hippies because, hippies are all about free love and it's all about love and we're all one. But out in the world, when you have to survive, we can't always be so open to everybody. But anyway, I found myself experiencing a type of OD where I had been given, I guess, what they call a hot shot, and my skin turned bright red, and I lost consciousness, and I was in the darkness again, and had no other experience except for feeling hands on my back, like I was on my tummy. And I was about 7 months pregnant, so I had a pretty good sized tummy. And the hands on my back were unwanted. I didn't want them there at all. I didn't want anyone touching me, and I could feel the movements on the back. And then I felt the presence of my father, not like my biological father or like that, but like God the Father, remove the hands from my back. And I felt that. I felt um his will was for me to be left alone. And I was in the darkness for a little while, but the next morning I did regain consciousness and was able to seek medical treatment and come out of that experience that I also became close to death in, that a lot of people do suffer uh, various side effects from. And so far, I'm okay. This was my last NDE was in 13, so we're 2024, and I'm okay so far. So
When you were having your second near death experience, when you were stabbed, do you feel like the universe or God was speaking to you in symbols Like, did you feel any symbolic meaning behind the visions that you were having, or that the environments that you were in, and the fighting? And I know you talked about sometimes, we have to move through harder things to get to the good things, but was there any specific thing that meant something to you? And I ask because I just did an interview with someone who also had an egg shape in their near death experience that they felt was symbolic.
Mhm. That is such a great question, and that had also been on my mind. So I'm grateful that you were to bring it up and to better explain it. During the time, no, there was no symmetry to understanding what I saw and felt and experienced. In fact, when I left the hospital being homeless, but still working, I actually went back to work with a bag still in my back to drain infection. But um, I didn't want to be here. I literally felt like a ghost. Like he didn't want me home and I'm back here. And had the worst attitude, just grief for myself and the pains of living, even a normal day-to-day life, I mean, sometimes it could just be too much. Um, so through the years of just going one day to the next and continuing to remain, and of course, my intent on what I was doing and how I'd want to live my life plays a huge role. I mean, regardless of where we come from, it's our choices and how we proceed forward that get us where we will be, even though we have conflict out in the world. Um, when you live life just thinking of spirit, not materialistic things, your standards are a little bit different. But after the years of my grief and my transition out of it, where all I could see every day was the fight that I had with him and choices that I would make in my life, did it relate to my NDE? I was greatly affected by it. Um, but the symmetry, like even the demon that I fought, or however you want to label him, or words that you'd like to use to describe him, because he could also be my brother. His weapons symbolize, for example, his razor hands symbolize my work. That they're very similar looking tools that I use in my work life. The sharp mouth, doesn't that symbolize how powerful our words are and what our choices, the sword arm that he had and how I was still able to touch it and knowing the repercussions, but my will was still that much, to continue the battle. Um, so it relates, I think, to life and how we can be up against so much, how impossible it is to win a fight like that, but we still have to try. We still have to continue, or we just lay there and be overcome. So when I was laying on the bed and the daggers were being pointed at my head, and when I woke up being in the hospital laying on the bed, and I reached back and I felt the dried blood on the back of my head and the seven in my hand, these things were, it was like the NDE was still continuing even though I was awake from that horrible dream. And so symbolically, it still applies to my life even today. For example, a year and a half ago, I randomly found a little puppy out on the street that was very lethargic and very sick and ill and needed medical attention, but I had no money and I could just help it the best I could. And it ended up surviving and being okay. And after it was cared for and coming through that battle that it had and it survived, I named this dog Valor. She's got a she survived her battle in she did the best she could with what she had. So she's my baby Valor. She has a patch that she was born with in her markings, one right in the middle of her forehead, a little white dot, and one line right in the back of her head, a little white dot. And so she has a pattern on her chest to me that is a smoking image of the victory of coming out of that battle and having valor with it. And so she's only a year and a half old, and that experience was an '02. But symbolically, I still see the signs every day around me. And I believe that her path and my path crossed for a reason, that as on earth it is in heaven, like we echo throughout who we are and what comes up into our life and what we deal with and how we present ourselves, and everything means something. And we're all connected as well. So being in spirit form, you're allowed to be free and have free will, and being in human form, it's the same. We're allowed to be free and have free will, or continue our battles. But the work that we have to do while we're here is so important, because what we create with our spirits and our bodies is what's going to create that continuous uh, our future, so to speak. So everything is important. Every choice that we make is important. Everything has a reason, and we can just take a breath and be in it and just be ourselves, unconditional love, or we can be in the battle of change.
That makes a lot of sense, and the way you explain it. And to me, an egg, I like the egg part of the story too. The egg symbolizes birth or a new life to me. Do you think maybe it was something like you battled this demon who, you know, symbolizes all these things that are wrong, like you said, like sharp words can hurt and things like that, and then you were transported in an egg to a new life after you were able to defeat that demon, where there was pleasant, beautiful, wonderful things.
The egg was very odd. It thrilled me to hear of another NDE's egg experience, and how in transition in his life that related, that he experienced in his NDE. So what I really took out of my eggshell in space scenario is just feeling the effects of time, and how long forever really is, and how it ticks by. You can feel every moment sometimes, and sometimes we are really just stuck. um, I was stuck. I couldn't leave the egg. My thoughts, and I was okay, but I just had that experience of waiting and um, not knowing. But once I found myself continuing my thought process, it's up to us. I feel as well like maybe I should have thought about it sooner. I don't know if that was just part of the experience, but even in our dreams, when we're in the void and we're waiting, we can create and create, and we can think and we can do in our dreams, but only in life with our bodies and our actions, our intent, can we actually create something real and touchable and tangible and to this current moment we're in on earth. Um, versus just sleeping your life away and living in your dreams, where we can only create so much. So yeah, that was definitely an odd experience about waiting, being patient, choosing your thoughts, um, what are you going to do with your time, and knowing that you're okay with just being who you are, because there's really nothing else you can do. So it's a lot to take in, and when you think about it that way.
I think that it's really interesting you said that the egg had to do with time because I told you there's another recent interview I had where his egg also had to do with time. So
Oh.
it's very interesting. Um, in the hospital, you saw a vision outside of war and ships and water. Do you think that you were still kind of in between, not quite here yet, but not quite there either?
Yes, as well as seeing the vision out my window, I also experienced like a corridor of apartments that were connected to the hospital that went up to the literal sky and just kept going out of sight's view, that were just filled with old ghosts. And these ghosts would go in their little homes and the steps would just go up and forever. And in each home that you came to, like an apartment, it was very odd. Each home was different. I was exploring this corridor and exploring the ghost building, and the people in there would come and go like they didn't not know they were ghosts, but they just went on with their normal life. It was very odd. But a unique experience too. I had another, not even an image, but a feel of, I guess, spirit, I call it, whispering in my ear, telling me not to worry, everything's going to be okay. You're going to have Lady Luck on your side, is what I called her, Lady Luck. And I'm like, what is Lady Luck? So just in my nomadic life that I've continued to live, I just have these angel people just come up next to me and put me under their wings and just guide with me, help me, and get me to that next point that I really need some help here. And there's always, no matter what, always someone there to help in my life. Oh, that reminds me of a point I did leave out in my NDE where I was laying on the ground and I had a small boy come down the steps and see me and go back up the steps. And to me, that relates to needing help and asking for help. And even though I didn't ask for help, I mean, he was just a witness, but in his being able to witness my experience, it's still created, I felt better seeing that. And so, yeah, the continuance just was in and out in the hospital. I felt lots of things. I could hear my cats crying because when I was stabbed in my apartment, no one could tend to my cats. And I could hear them crying. And someone finally was able to get in there once I awoke. They were in there for 9 days and were able to survive. And I was reunited with them afterwards. And I could hear them in my room. So I was still not sure what I was experiencing. I could hear music while I was laying in bed. I heard gospel music, like praise Jesus, just screaming your heart out, clapping. I could hear just revival. The sounds of that song just stays with me as well. Just praise worship music. So yeah, lots of different experiences and just being out on my own. Having IANDS and the NDE community come up is breathtaking. I know we've been waiting for it. I could almost feel the movement of everybody coming together and creating a safe place to be able to talk about things that are very hard to talk about. But, once we're all together, it really makes sense.
Did you bring back any gifts with you after your experience or your experience?
Oh, the after effects. Oh my God. Uh, so definitely clairvoyancy and I guess memories, like past memories. And um I have been on a calling to just be able to meet various mediums and psychics. Just in my day-to-day activities, I have been blessed by being able to be in one's presence that is able to experience different sense. Um, and I can definitely communicate with my animals and uh, the empathy. Lots of odd dreams my whole life. I've even made major life decisions based on a dream, which most people would, you know, question that. But no, I'm very, I guess, intuitive. But I feel uh, like we should all be accepted for who we are. And so in the world, we have a lot of judging and, you know, standards to meet and, you know, doctrines to go into and religions that we could fit into or not fit into and cliques that, you know, so life is just, oh my gosh, my ND was hard. Well, life is harder, people. And there's lots of real choices we have to make out there. And, it's just so easy to get caught up in the whirl of everything and lose our identity or just get caught up in someone else's identity. So I don't know, uh it's I don't know how to explain it. uh I guess just being kind to other people, and even though they're different from you, so you have to have like tolerance of different people, because we're all brothers and sisters and we all are connected. And if it's hard for me, I know it's going to be hard for them. And if I experience it, they could easily experience a similar thing, or it could be totally different. So we just live in a really mean world sometimes. And I've chosen to try and be kind through that, especially in my work where I work with animals. And so I use my compassion and my empathy to give them a gift of a calm spirit instead of just running with the turmoil and saying, well, it is what it is, you get what you get. But I just, with my intent, try to keep things as pleasant as possible. Um, I would just like to state that when we do choose our religions and our ways of life, even though they are our individual ways, but they're also the same as others. So, for example, I can go to a Christian church or a Buddhist temple, or, you know, what terms you want to use. And we love to talk about these things and we love to argue about them. But to me, they're just different ways of saying things, different ways of conveying stories, and different ways of living and choices. So we can choose to be in the battle over how we label things and how we word things and place things and put things, or we can choose to just accept what it is and how it is. Of course, conflicting, you can always have Hitler come over and rule the world once we're all submissive. So there's no right or wrong. It's just what we do makes a difference. And that's very, very important. Um, so yeah.
If my viewers wanted to reach out to you if they had more questions, would you be open to that?
I guess so. I don't have all the answers. I can share my story and you can ponder it just as I have and relate it to your life. And if you want to contact me, I'm available on Facebook. And other than that, through email, I guess, flyforeverfree, the number 9 at gmail.com. And you can get a hold of me there.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers, or maybe your biggest gift or takeaway from your experiences?
Um, I would say kudos to everyone trying. There's so many different NDE stories out there that every single one is very impactful. And I've chosen to be aware of everyone, but I haven't invested my time to actually learn of everyone's stories or watch everyone's stories. I'm still in transition, focusing on my life, but being able to share and just debrief with someone, to be able to speak my truth, takes that weight off of my chest so much, that I don't have to worry about it. So, um, I would encourage others to share as well and just surround yourself with people who bring you up. And if you're not around people who bring you up, just know that you're still going to be okay.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, taking time out of your day to share with us. And I'm glad that it could be a conduit for healing for you. Um,
Yep.
it was absolutely my honor to have you as my guest.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you. I'm sure it'll be online somewhere. So I'll be following. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you so much. It's on YouTube, and I'll send you a link once it's posted.
Awesome.
All right, Alicia, well, you have a beautiful and blessed day. I wish all the best for you.
Thank you so much. You too.